The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. David will be back from vacation tomorrow. But in the meantime, we've got a lot to talk about today. Specifically, biggest news right now happening, Brett Kavanaugh. What's happening right now with this whole Kavanaugh sexual abuse allegation is absolutely disgusting. But what we've seen coming from Republicans is really no different than these lawmakers and pundits and everyone have responded to other sexual assault allegations, for the last few years. This is the typical Republican right-wing response. So when you have Christine Ford, she came forward with these allegations, and now at this point, her and her family have basically had to go into hiding. A friend close to the family has come forward and said that she is receiving death threats. People are emailing her, messaging her, sending her notes on social media saying, you only have a few months left to live. The friend also said that roughly 90% of the responses she's gotten have been overwhelmingly positive, but about 10% of them have been, we want you dead now. All this woman did was come forward with a story that she had told to her therapist many years ago, told her husband, passed a polygraph test. And yet, in spite of that, Republicans are out there every day trying to smear this woman and say that she is somehow part of some kind of contrived Democratic plot to derail Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. The responses from Republicans have run the gamut of full-blown conspiracy theories, which we'll get to in a second, to let's just hear her out so we can move on and go ahead and confirm Brett Kavanaugh. That's actually Lindsey Graham. Yeah, I'm willing to hear her out, but then we just need to get this thing moving as fast as possible. But with those conspiracy theories, and this to me is probably one of the more disgusting things we have going on right now with this whole story, you have the people out there who first they tried to make the argument that she's coming forward with these allegations because Brett Kavanaugh's mother foreclosed on her parents' home back in the late 90s. First and foremost, that story is not even true. Yes, her parents did go through the foreclosure process. Kavanaugh's mother was the judge in that case. However, she did not foreclose on their home. They did not even lose the home because during that foreclosure proceeding, they were able to secure additional financing for their home. So they kept the house. Kavanaugh dismissed it. The bank said, okay, you've got the money. Fine. We're not going to foreclose. That's how that story ended. There were no hard feelings between the family and the judge and even the bank. Everybody got what they needed. So Kavanaugh said, great. Best of luck to everybody. That's how that story ended. Yet Republicans are trying to spin it to say that Kavanaugh's mom took their home away, so she's been nursing this grudge for 21 years, waiting for her opportunity to strike. Okay, well, we now know that's not true. Then you have the other allegation that, oh, this woman is only a part of the Fusion GPS crowd because her brother worked at the law firm that represents Fusion GPS. Wow, what a coincidence, huh? Except for the fact that her brother left that law firm back in 2004, which was a full 7 years before Fusion GPS was ever even founded. So all of the conspiracy theories have fallen apart. So what we're left with now is just the standard Republican response of, oh, well then, since that didn't pan out, she's either a liar or, you know, we should just forget it happened because Brett Kavanaugh was only 17 at the time. I mean, he's just a kid. Why should we let something that somebody did in their youth affect the rest of their life? Well, maybe you should ask that question to Tamir Rice. Maybe you should ask Michael Brown. I mean, if we're really going to go there, like Republicans want us to go there, then we've got to relook at every single thing that they've ever told us was fully justified. Trayvon Martin, also 17 years old. He's dead now, and he didn't do anything. He doesn't get a shot at redemption. He doesn't get a second chance. Somebody made that decision to end his life at the age of 17 because his big mistake was walking down the street. Brett Kavanaugh, if the allegations are true, and this is an incredibly credible person coming forward with these allegations that have now, stories this morning, former high school classmates of hers have come out, corroborated the story, admitted that pretty much everybody in the school knew it happened. They talked about it for weeks afterwards, what the stories are telling us today. So they knew it happened. And yet, Orrin Hatch, Lindsey Graham, the usual suspects are out there saying, nope, we don't believe it. This doesn't warrant an FBI investigation, is what Orrin Hatch told us this week. And yet he was one of the people who pushed to actually have an FBI investigation with Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. Back then, he thought it was worth looking into, even though that investigation literally lasted 3 days. He still thought it was a decent idea. But now today, bad idea. We don't need the FBI. We don't need to look into this. Let's just bring her into the court on Monday. Why isn't she accepting our invitation? Well, maybe it's just me, but it could be the combination of death threats that this woman is receiving on a daily basis now, combined with the fact that she would have to testify in front of a bunch of old white men who've made it clear in the media that they think she is a liar. And again, as I said, this just goes back to the standard response that you see from the right wing anytime a woman comes forward with sexual assault allegation. They'll tell us either, oh, she's lying. She's just straight up lying. They'll tell us, oh, she's looking for money or fame or publicity. I mean, we saw that play itself out down at FSU during the Jameis Winston years. That's how they attacked his accuser. Oh, she just wants to come forward now because he's famous. She just wants money. You have the more disgusting responses saying, well, she didn't report it at the time because maybe she enjoyed it. Maybe she shouldn't have been dressed that way. Maybe she should have controlled how much she drank that night. None of those apply in this instance either, but they're still out there trying to make up these absolutely insane excuses. They don't apply in the other circumstances either. It is not the woman's fault. It is the fault of the man who perpetrates the crime. And let's be clear about that. Rather than giving the women the benefit of the doubt, they will typically, close to 100% of the time, they're always going to go and say, no, this poor guy who's being accused, that's the victim. That's the person we have to feel sympathy for. Oh, Donald Trump comes out, oh, I feel so badly for him. Yeah, what would we expect from a guy who's been credibly accused of the same kinds of actions and others by at least 19 different women? But Republicans are so hell-bent on making sure that Kavanaugh makes it to the Supreme Court that they're willing to overlook this. They're willing to smear this woman, let her be subjected to these death threats. Meanwhile, Brett Kavanaugh and his wife are handing out sprinkles cupcakes to reporters who come to their home because they're in no danger. This is appalling. But honestly, I think everyone who's followed this story could have 100% predicted that this is the way it would have played itself out. And speaking of predicting the way that things are going to play out, Donald Trump's trade wars. He escalated them earlier this week when he announced that he was putting a 10% tariff on at least $200 billion worth of new goods coming from China to the United States. Almost immediately after that, China announced that they would respond accordingly and put in these retaliatory tariffs. But $200 billion, 10% tariff on these. So Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, decides that he's going to make everybody calm. He's going to try to help everybody understand that, yeah, this is a lot of tariffs, $20 billion total, 10% of 200 billion. But really, it's not that big of a deal. So Wilbur Ross goes on television and tells us this. Here it is.
Mr. Secretary, average American family making $50,000 a year, let's say, how much do you expect these tariffs will impact them? Meaning, have you done the math so that you know what an average family in America will pay once these tariffs go into effect?
Well, you can do the numbers this way. If you have a 10% tariff on another $200 billion, that's $20 billion a year. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of 1% total inflation in the U.S. Because it's spread over thousands and thousands of products, nobody's going to actually notice it at the end of the day.
Nobody's going to notice it, right? I mean, $20 billion extra that we're going to end up paying each year, but we're not going to notice it. I mean, of course, the billionaire Wilbur Ross wouldn't expect us to notice price increases. And in case you're wondering, these are goods, they're refrigerators, air conditioners, toys, things that actually average American citizens buy. It's not like they're putting this massive tax on yachts and marble for countertops in mansions. These are things that we purchase, things that we need to have. Furthermore, Wilbur Ross, the billionaire, doesn't quite seem to understand how the economy works, because it's not a total of 10%. Like, this item gets taxed at 0.05% and it adds up to 10% eventually. What is he talking about? But that's what he told us there. He said, yeah, it's 10% total when you add everything up. No, it would be a 10% roughly increase on the individual items. And think about this. You're a middle-class family, right? Maybe not even quite middle class yet. You're pulling in $30,000, $40,000 a year as a family household, maybe of 4. 2 kids, married couple, $40,000 a year. You need to go buy a new refrigerator because yours just quit. Usually $800, $900 low-end model, right? Suddenly, that $800 goes up to $900. When you're already on a very limited fixed income, that increase of $100, that matters. That's a doctor's visit. That is a prescription refilled here in the United States. So suddenly now, families have to choose, do we get the new refrigerator and go without a prescription this month? What do we do? And again, 100% of this lies at the feet of Donald Trump and his idiotic billionaire advisors who keep telling him that nobody's going to notice these dramatic price increases because we don't notice them and we're billionaires. It makes absolutely no sense, but that's this administration. I'm Farron Cousins, and for David Pakman, we'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for David Pakman today. Earlier this week, Donald Trump announced that he was going to declassify information related to the FISA warrant obtained on Carter Page. Now, there's been a lot of analysis and speculation about what this actually means, what it could do to national security, whether or not it's obstruction of justice. All of those are very valid points. We're going to address those in just a moment, but I want to take a minute to explain what's actually happening here. This is obstruction of justice. It is a national security problem, but more importantly, this is just the next progression in Donald Trump's attacks on the special prosecutor. That's the main purpose of this release. Because it's not just the FISA information about Carter Page that they're after, or that they're going to release. They're going to release testimonies and interviews conducted by Bruce Orr. They're going to release text messages from Andrew McCabe and James Comey and Bruce Orr, Any text message that they have related to the investigation, those are going to be made public. And there's only one reason to do that, and that is to try to paint a picture of a corrupt intelligence agency and Justice Department, thereby nullifying the entire special prosecutor's investigation. That is the point of Trump trying to release this information. That is why he constantly tweets stuff out about lovely Lisa Page and Peter Strzok and their text messages and how they were conspiring against him from inside the FBI, even though they really didn't do anything outside of what was perfectly legal for their department. There is no evidence at all that there was any wrongdoing on behalf of any of these intelligence agencies, anyone at the Justice Department, even Christopher Steele himself at the dossier. And yet they're trying to use selected pieces of information to tell us that everything about this investigation is completely fraudulent and therefore should be shut down. Because that's Trump's ultimate goal, is to shut it down. Or at the very least, fire Robert Mueller, which is actually going to create a lot more headache for him than Mueller already has. It's a lose-lose situation for this guy, but he doesn't understand that yet. He thinks that he can fire Robert Mueller, paint him as this corrupt Democratic plant, and somehow that's going to end the investigation. Big smiles all around for the Trump administration, a happy ending. He goes on to serve 30 more years as president. But really, this is going to backfire, just like everything this man has done since becoming president. Everything he touches turns to garbage. Every plan he has falls apart. And everything he does actually ends up giving more fodder to the special prosecutor. Think of the Nunes memo, right? That was supposed to clear the air and show us how corrupt these departments are. It actually did the opposite and told us that the FISA warrant and the investigation itself were not based on the Steele dossier. That's what it said in the Nunes memo. It was not based on the Steele dossier. Yet to this day, we have the president out there still saying it's all based on the dirty dossier. Well, let me ask you this, folks. Let's assume that it was all based on the dossier that was originally funded by the Washington Free Beacon, conservatives, then picked up by Hillary Clinton, then actually self-financed after the Hillary Clinton's law firm that was representing her stopped paying. So they say Democrats funded it, but it's literally across the board. You have conservatives, you have Democrats, and you have self-financing after everybody else stopped paying because they believed it was worth looking into. Nonetheless, suppose it was all based on the dossier. All right, let's think about that. What from the dossier has been proven false? Can anyone, maybe tweet it at me? What parts of the dossier have been proven to be false? Can anyone do that? Could anyone point to anything that it was said in that dossier, any point that was made, and say, here is the evidence to show that it's not true? The answer is you can't. In fact, every claim in there that's actually been investigated has been proven to be true. We're batting 1,000 over here on this issue, folks. And yet Trump is trying to say that, oh, they based it on this. Well, first of all, they didn't. But second of all, if they did, they probably had a reason to. Now, let's get to the issues everybody's talked about here that we mentioned earlier. The national security thing. That is a big issue. Obviously, when you have these classified pieces of information, they have outside sources that are sources for the U.S. government and other countries. If you release that information, that puts those sources in danger. Either endangers their lives or endangers their will to cooperate with us in the future. We need those people. Those are good sources for the U.S. government and our intelligence agencies. The second claim is the obstruction of justice. Now, this 100% could be viewed as obstruction of justice. The big thing with obstruction of justice from a legal standpoint is that you have to be able to show intent. What was the intent of the release of these materials? Well, Trump himself has made it clear that the intent is to show that this investigation is fraudulent, that everything that's happening is absolutely based on lies, based on nonsense. We shouldn't let it continue. And if that's the case, then I think the intent there for obstruction of justice would be exceptionally easy to prove. All you have to do is look at the guy's own Twitter feed. And luckily, we know that Robert Mueller is actually looking at the president's Twitter feed. People who've gone in to testify in front of him or talk with him, they've been asked about tweets. They've been asked about obstruction of justice. And this is just the latest evolution of that. And as big as those two issues are, and they are big, the obstruction of justice and the national security threat here, let's not lose sight of the fact that the reason this is happening is because this is the progression of the attacks on Mueller. Rudy Giuliani made it very clear a month and a half ago. They were going to step up their attacks. This is what they were going to do. And today, this week, it's come to fruition. He's laying more groundwork. He wants to fire Mueller. He wants to fire Sessions. He said just this week, I don't have an attorney general. A blatant attack on Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the entire investigation. He wants to fire them all. But the problem he has, this is why it's going to backfire, is that, yeah, you can fire them all day long. You're still required to replace them. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get a Trump suck-up in either of those positions, or at least certainly not going to get somebody who's going to be willing to overlook all of the information and prosecutions and subpoenas that they already have out there. Once you're confronted with that kind of information and you see what's going on, even if you love the guy, probably going to be pretty hard to ignore that. But we also can't forget that it's not just the Mueller investigation. As good of a distraction as that is right now, this man, Donald Trump, still out there making policy, still out there making decisions. Even his, I don't have an attorney general, Jeff Sessions, is out there making decisions that are going to affect the lives of tens of thousands of people in this country, specifically immigrants. On Tuesday of this week, there was a hearing, the Senate Homeland Security Committee. They brought in, let's see, it was Executive Associate Director for ICE, Matthew Albence, and Acting Deputy Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection, Robert Perez, where they asked them about the Trump administration's indefinite detention, basically, of migrant children. And they asked them about the psychological effects that this kind of detention would have on the kids. Their response was absolutely disgusting. Here it is.
Peters referenced the American Academy of Pediatrics. It strongly opposes long-term detention of children. A March 2017 report from the Academy notes that such detention, and this is a quote, can cause psychological trauma and induce long-term mental health risks for children, close quote. The report goes on to say that detaining children can lead to physical and emotional symptoms such as post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal ideation, behavioral problems, and difficulty functioning in school. I'm going to ask both Mr. Albence and Mr. Perez just to clarify your answer to Senator Peters. Are you aware of that report from the American Academy of Pediatrics? First, Mr. Albence.
If I could just clarify, we don't have indefinite detention.
My question is, are you aware of that report from the American Academy of Pediatrics?
I think I've seen media reports on that report.
Okay.
So he says, I think I've seen media reports on that thing. The other guy actually said he wasn't aware, didn't know it existed, had no idea something like that could happen. So I, honest to God, don't know which is worse. The guy who says, yeah, I knew about it, or the guy who says, oh, I had no idea. Either one of those is an equally unacceptable answer for what's happening with this administration. And to go back to Albence's point, we don't have indefinite detention. Well, the Flores settlement says you don't have indefinite detention. You can only hold them for 20 days by themselves, then you have to reunite them. That's true. However, a week ago, this administration filed a new rule that has yet to be put into effect, and it's got to be approved by the courts, which probably won't happen. But it basically scrapped the entire Flores settlement from 1997. They want to indefinitely detain children. They filed the rule to do it. So for him to sit there and say, we don't have that, is an absolute lie, because the administration that he works for just tried to get it done. Furthermore, we know that they're actually tripling the size of at least one child detention facility right outside of El Paso, Texas. And we know that the contracts that they gave out from the federal government for these private companies to come in and build and maintain and staff these detention facilities, those run for the next 4 years. You don't up the size of your child prisons. You don't give somebody a contract to run it for 4 years if you're not planning on using it. And I think that's a part of the story too many people have missed, is that contractor angle. Some contractors have a 6-year contract to build more of these detention facilities. Yeah, Trump announced earlier in the summer he was going to stop the family separation. We find out now today an additional 1,500 migrant children have been lost or misplaced. They're not ending it. They're not pulling it back. They're not scaling it back. They're not stopping it. They're still doing it today. They plan on still doing it tomorrow. And as long as this man is in office, they're going to keep doing it until they get told by the Supreme Court that they can't. You can follow me on Twitter at Farron Balanced. You can also find me on YouTube, youtube.com/TheRingOfFire. I am Farron Cousins in for David Pakman. We'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. So there's been a lot of recent polls this week coming out of the state of Texas. Some show Ted Cruz leading by as much as 9 points. We got from the latest Quinnipiac poll. Then we had polls out today showing Beto O'Rourke leading by 2 points. So at this point, you know, probably closer to a statistical dead heat technically. Cruz obviously probably has a bit of an edge there, but still neck and neck for all practical purposes down there in this very important Senate race. But here's the thing. As those polls have tightened over the last few weeks, Ted Cruz's attacks on his opponent have grown from just the standard, this guy's bad, to the absolute absurd. This past weekend, at an event, Ted Cruz allegedly jokingly told the audience, because there were some PETA protesters there, that if elected, Beto O'Rourke could ban barbecue from the state of Texas. Now, all of the Ted Cruz defenders immediately came out and said, listen, obviously this guy was joking. I mean, Ted Cruz is quite the jokester. Okay, but then why did he say it 2 more times on different venues and outlets? Because that's what happened. After that, Ted Cruz said it at least 2 more times that Beto will ban barbecue from the state of Texas. If it was a joke, you don't go out there and repeat it. If you think it's something that's going to resonate with your base, whether or not it's true, you do go out there and repeat it. And that's what happened with Ted Cruz. He saw that it hit, and he decided, you know what? I'm going to run with this. I'm going to keep saying it. Because if I say it enough, maybe I can break ahead in all the polls. Maybe I can just beat this challenger for good. We've had attacks from Cruz trying to say that Beto is going to California our Texas. California our Texas. That's something that Ted Cruz actually tweeted out earlier this week. Don't California our Texas. As if California is just this land of hedonism and horribleness, you know, despite the fact that they actually have a pretty decent economy out there. They're moving forward on renewable energy. But yeah, don't do that to Texas, apparently, because that means bringing in tofu and dyed hair is what Cruz warned people about. They're going to bring dyed hair to the state of Texas because apparently, based on Cruz's statement up till this point, you couldn't dye your hair in Texas. There was no hair dye. Beto O'Rourke is the guy who's going to bring in the hair dye to the state of Texas, according to Ted Cruz. Cruz has gone after him for being a former member of a punk rock band, as if that's something to be ashamed of. You know, you really want to resonate with the younger voters, go after music. That's a smart idea. Saying, look how awesome this guy was. He was in a band. Ew, right? Yeah, probably not going to work out so well at the polls with the younger crowd. Nonetheless, it's what Ted Cruz has done. But I think, personally, the most disgusting thing that Ted Cruz has done during his race against Beto O'Rourke is begging Donald Trump to come to Texas to hold a rally to help save him. The reason that's so disgusting, one, we've seen the Trump rallies. They're not about the candidate at all. They're about him. And Texas is probably a place where it's going to play pretty well. You sit there, brag about yourself for an hour, everybody loves it. You talk about how you hate those people coming across the border, they love it. But let's not forget what Donald Trump did to Ted Cruz during the presidential campaign. I mean, Donald Trump not only insulted Ted Cruz personally, he insulted his wife's appearance, and he also gave credence to the conspiracy theory that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the JFK assassination. Donald Trump helped kind of push that. And now Ted Cruz, in spite of the fact that the man has insulted every branch of his family tree, still says, please come and help me and save me from Beto. If I were living in the state of Texas and I was an independent voter and I saw that, and I saw that this man valued that Senate seat more than he values his own wife, his father, any member of his family, that would immediately be disqualifying for me. I wouldn't tolerate it. I wouldn't accept it. I wouldn't condone it. And I sure as heck wouldn't vote for it. And I think that's what the voters in the state of Texas need to understand. Sometimes you go past the policy. Sometimes you do look at just the personal character of someone. And if Ted Cruz values that little Senate seat so much more than he values his own wife to ask the man who attacked her to come and campaign for him, then yeah, that should be disqualifying. Another attack that Cruz has levied on Beto, and I love talking about this because Cruz is such a disgusting character, is the fact that he's mocking Beto O'Rourke for going by Beto instead of Robert. Because, according to Cruz, he's just trying to appeal to the Latina community, Hispanics, immigrants, by changing his name to Beto. Really, Raphael? That's where you want to be? You want to be talking about people changing their name, Mr. Rafael Cruz? I don't think that's exactly where you should be going with your line of attacks. Ted Cruz is in trouble. He knows he's in trouble. But more importantly, other Republicans in the country know that he's in trouble. Last week, Mick Mulvaney from the CFPV gave a speech in New York where he said Ted Cruz is likely going to lose in Texas, but it's okay because we're probably going to pick up that Senate seat down in Florida with Rick Scott running against Bill Nelson. But he said Cruz is probably going to lose because he's so likable. Now, Mulvaney actually said this to a group of Republican donors gathered in New York, that Cruz is so unlikable. And he's right. We actually know that from the time that Ted Cruz worked on George W. Bush's 2000 campaign, because he wasn't offered a job within the administration after the victory because nobody there liked him. When everyone that's ever spent time with the man comes forward and says, wow, I really dislike him, maybe that should tell the voters something. You only know the man from afar. You only see him on TV. You see him at a campaign spot. You don't have to deal with him one-on-one. But just take the word of the people who have had to do that, even those who agree with him on everything, they still say that he is an unlikable creep, which probably should give you enough to know when you go to the polls and cast your ballot. Do you want to vote for the guy who actually wants to do something about the state of Texas? Beto O'Rourke wants to make things better? Or do you want to vote for the guy that even his closest friends say is just really, really unlikable? Personally, I'd go for Beto, but I'm not a resident of Texas, so I guess I don't have a say in the matter. But here's another crazy Texas story that actually doesn't involve Ted Cruz. Late last Friday, the Texas Board of Education voted to remove mention of powerful women from their history curriculum. Hillary Clinton and Helen Keller specifically. Those are the two that the Texas Board of Education said, you know what, we're not going to teach anything about Hillary Clinton or Helen Keller anymore because there's just not enough time in the day to get through all those things. So Hillary Clinton and Helen Keller, you are out of Texas schools effective very soon. Here's the thing. I don't care if you like Hillary Clinton, if you love Hillary Clinton, or if you hate Hillary Clinton. The woman has made an impact on history, and that is undeniable. Much the same way as Donald Trump. Personally, I can't stand the man, but you can't deny that he hasn't had an impact on this country. Hillary Clinton, same way. She was a first lady for 8 years, then a U.S. senator, then a secretary of state, and then the first female nominee of a major party here in the United States. That is historic. And children, the 5.4 million children going to school in the state of Texas, deserve to learn about that. Wouldn't you think? Helen Keller, you know, a story that everybody in this country learns about because it is such an inspiring story. This woman who nobody thought would ever even be able to function, making these great strides and this progress is a great story that if you concentrate, if you put your mind to it, if you put forth the effort, then there's no adversity too great that you can't overcome. That is what that story is about. And it was a powerful woman, Helen Keller, that did it. And they want to take that out of the schools in Texas. They also, equally as disgusting, want to take out any mention of optimism when talking about immigrants. So they want to go back through history. You could probably remember, I remember it vividly, pictures in my middle school history books of immigrants on boats waving at the Statue of Liberty as they, pull into New York Harbor, coming here for better life. They wanted something better than what they had back home. Optimism was the main theme. They're taking that out of schools in Texas. They don't want people to think of immigrants as human beings who just want something better. No, these are illegal invaders coming in. You can't say that they're happy or that they want to contribute to society. No, that might send the wrong message in the state of Texas. So those are the things that are taken out. So what are they going to replace them with? Judeo-Christian teachings and Moses. They want to add into the curriculum discussions about how Moses and the Ten Commandments really laid the groundwork for the founding of the United States and our own Constitution. So they're taking out real people that we can verify have existed and instead replacing them with characters from the Bible that may or may not have been real. Really not a lot of evidence to suggest that they were. I don't mean to offend anyone's religious beliefs with that, but that shouldn't be allowed in schools. In fact, I believe there's a document that kind of runs our country that says you can. But don't tell that to the folks down there at the Texas Board of Education, because they're going to make sure that they get that in while removing mentions of Hillary Clinton and Helen Keller. Oh, and by the way, you know how much time they're going to save not talking about Helen Keller each year? They've estimated it to be 40 minutes. Hillary Clinton, 30 minutes. So they're saving an hour and 10 minutes per year by cutting out two powerful women from history. We need to take a quick break, but you can follow me on Twitter at Farron Balanced. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/TheRingOfFire. I am Farron Cousins, sitting in for David Pakman, who will return tomorrow. We'll be right back with more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. Earlier, we talked a lot about some of the craziness coming out of the state of Texas, the Board of Education, Ted Cruz. But, you know, Florida always tries to give Texas a run for their money on who can be just the weirdest state in the country, or the most corrupt, or the most vile. And I don't think that Texas has anything on current Florida governor, current Republican Senate candidate, Rick Scott. Rick Scott is absolutely one of the worst politicians in the United States today. This is a man who, long before he ever had a career in politics, was running a healthcare company, and they committed one of the largest Medicare frauds in the history of the United States. In fact, at the time, it was the largest, over $1 billion. And he had to plead the Fifth Amendment more than 74 times to avoid implicating himself in a crime. And knowing that, this state still voted for him twice as our governor. And guess what, folks? He brought that same level of corruption that he had in business to our government down here in the state of Florida. And now he thinks that that corruption is going to propel him to a U.S. Senate seat to unseat Democrat Bill Nelson. This week, Rick Scott basically got chased out of a campaign stop because of protesters. And these people were there protesting the massive red tide that we're currently having throughout our state on both the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast. We have dead marine animals, including dead marine mammals, dolphins, we got turtles, everything washing up dead all over our shores. Tourism has taken a massive hit, which is this state's #1 source of economic activity. Beaches are being shut down. In some areas, the red tide is so bad that if you go close enough to the water and breathe in, you will get sick. Not can, will. And Rick Scott has been governor throughout all of this. So when he was at a campaign stop the other day for his Senate race, he was met by a bunch of protesters. And he was so terrified that he actually entered through the back of the restaurant where he was doing his little stop and stayed for less than 10 minutes because the chants of, hey, hey, ho, ho, Red Tide Rick has got to go. Those cheers, chants from those protesters chased Rick Scott from that campaign stop. And hopefully they're going to chase him all around this state because that's what needs to happen. Rick Scott right now, and I know you don't see it if you're not living in the state of Florida, luckily I am, so I'm subjected to it daily, is running campaign ads actually blaming the red tide on Bill Nelson, saying that because Bill Nelson works in Washington, D.C., that he somehow is the one who controls the floodwaters and the dams in the southern part of Florida, which is where the red tide originates, and it's his fault that even happened. Now, that's a really seriously twisted look on reality. But here's what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Each year, Lake Okeechobee down in Florida, biggest lake in the state, the rainy season comes, the lake overflows, they vent it out. There's a river running from Okeechobee to the Gulf and one running from Okeechobee to the Atlantic. Okeechobee is heavily polluted. The sugar industry dumps a lot of toxins in there. They've got a lot of power in the state, so they're allowed to do it. Those toxins help breed the algae and other bacteria. So when we vent that lake out into the Atlantic and the Gulf, creates a red tide. Now, there were already algae blooms because of the warmer than usual waters in the Atlantic and Gulf had massive algae blooms already. And when it met with the algae coming from Okeechobee, it created this massive disaster we're seeing today. Rick Scott's trying to blame it on Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson has done a very poor job of explaining to voters in the state of Florida that Rick Scott, as the governor, cut $700 million from the state's environmental budget, and he cut back the government agency that's actually in charge of water quality and preventing things like this from happening. You can't blame the entire red tide on Rick Scott, but I venture to say that you could probably blame about 90% of it on Rick Scott through his environmental and budget cuts. Because had he not done that, this entire disaster could have been 100% preventable. Speaking of preventable disasters, Georgia. Let's move slightly north from Florida now, and let's head over to Georgia, where this week a judge ruled that the state doesn't have to switch to paper ballots, even though that same judge admitted in her court ruling that, wow, your voting system is very flawed, it's easily hackable, and it's not reliable, but I'm not going to make you switch to paper ballots for this year's election, which is supposed to be one of the biggest in state's history, because right now the Democrats have an African-American woman as their nominee for governor, and if she were to win, she would become the first African-American governor, female governor, in the history of the United States. Historic election about to take place. This judge gets a lawsuit on her bench because the state's voting systems are so unreliable. She acknowledges that, she admits that, everybody admits it, but she still says we're not switching to paper ballots. Now, in all fairness, let's look at her reasoning here. She says that the reason is because it would create too much confusion. People wouldn't exactly know what to do. There's a potential for mistakes being printed and not enough time probably to correct them, so we can't do it. I'm going to go ahead and say no to that. Printing ballots, even millions of them, it doesn't take all that much time. I mean, this seems like something you could have expedited. You know, you double check the proof to make sure there's no wrong information on there. Triple check it, quadruple check it if you have to. Run it by 20 people. And then once you all know there's nothing wrong with it, you print it. I think this was a very lame excuse from this judge, and I don't buy it. I mean, the state of Georgia is one of a few states in this country that has a fully electronic voting system that does not have a paper trail, and there are no way to verify any of the votes. So you go into that, voting booth, whatever, you do your touch screen, and that's it. You can't go back and verify anything. The state can't prove who you voted for. Nothing. Completely unaccountable, and because it's 100% electronic, easily hackable. They've had this since 2002. So we're talking about 16 years they've had this antiquated voting system in place. And not antiquated because I guess technically it is technologically more advanced, but still, they've known about the flaws for 16 years. And now they're saying, we still don't have enough time to get it done before this election. I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second. They have known about this for too long. They could have done something, but they're not. And that is absolutely sick and disgusting. And it's likely that we're going to see a lot of voting problems coming out of the state of Georgia in this year's midterm. So that is definitely something. Keep it on your radar. Pay attention election day. We're going to hear some very real horror stories coming out about what's going on over in Georgia. And finally today, end with a little bit more good news, okay? This is actually good news. This is real good news. This past Saturday, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, in a motion that he did not consult the rest of his Supreme Court about, actually issued a stay on a ruling from a lower court that, had he not issued, would have forced the disclosure of countless dark money political campaign donors this past Monday. But Roberts knew that the lower court's ruling going into effect Monday would harm the Republicans in the midterm, so he came out Saturday and said, I'm issuing a stay. That ruling cannot go into effect. You're not going to learn the names of these people on September 17th, as the original lawsuit had said. That case was actually decided back in August, But Roberts waited 2 days before those names would have become public to issue his stay, and he did it on a Saturday. You know, obviously, slower news day, people aren't paying as much attention. Why not jump in there and try to do it? But that's obviously a bad thing, right? And I told you this was a happy story. Well, here's the happy story. Here's the good part. The rest of his Supreme Court was paying attention. And the rest of his Supreme Court, liberals, conservatives alike, didn't like what John Roberts did. And yesterday, they vacated his stay and said, you know what? We disagree with you, John Roberts, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And apparently, when we band together, we're a little bit more powerful than you. So we're getting rid of the motion to stay that you had, and we're saying release the names of the donors. The rest of the court, again, liberals and conservatives actually coming together to do something good for transparency and campaign finance, vacated his stay. So now, very soon, we're going to learn the names of the dark money donors who are controlling our elections. Now, the original lawsuit was against Karl Rove's Crossroads GPS. The lawsuit was filed actually several years ago by Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Cruz, because they wanted to know the names. But there was actually a law that's been on the book for decades that says this kind of dark money going to these politically active nonprofits is okay. You don't have to release the names of the donors unless that donor gives you money and says, I want you to spend this money on a certain thing. In that case, you have to disclose the name. Otherwise, you don't have to disclose. The judge in August threw that out and said, no, disclose all the names, everybody, no matter what. They give you money, you tell us who they are. That's how it's going to be from now on. John Roberts stepped in, politically motivated, trying to stop that from happening. Had nothing to do with the rule of law. He understood that the midterms are right around the corner, and releasing the names of these donors could significantly hurt the Republican Party. But guess what? His stay got shot down by his own Supreme Court, who believed he was wrong. Not just wrong in his ruling, but wrong to act politically from the bench. Because that's what happened. This wasn't about the law. This was about John Roberts' politics and his desire to protect the Republican Party in the upcoming midterms. So pay attention. As we get closer, start watching those political ads. Read the bottom. Because very soon you just might see the name and finally know who, which human being, not organization, is actually funding those. I want to thank David Pakman, Max, Patrick, everybody for all their help today, for letting me sit in, taking over the reins now and a few weeks ago as well. So thank you very much. And if you're not completely sick of me, do follow me on Twitter at FarronBalanced. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TheRingOfFire. Thank you everyone for letting me fill in. David's back tomorrow, and he'll see you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.